Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the virtual book launch. I'm so excited to be here and share this whole journey with you. And I am really delighted to also announce that I have my good friend, 𝗪𝗵ecie 𝗔𝐴LEXANDER, to help facilitate this event. And she's going to be interviewing me tonight.
So, welcome to Sharon's book launch. I am her dear friend, 𝗪𝗵ecie 𝗔𝐴LEXANDER, and so excited to be facilitating this with Sharon. This has been a labor of love for Sharon, and so if you haven't read this book, I can't stress enough how incredibly insightful and useful it is, and how clinically savvy it is. I'm also a psychotherapist, so I read a lot of this information and materials, and I've never read anything about burnout. And so it just feels particularly relevant right now to the time and place that we're living in. But without going into my reviews of it, because I'm going to encourage all of you to not only purchase the book, to read the book, to review the book on Amazon. These are the best ways that we can get the word out there for Sharon, to not only write your own review of the book on Amazon, but also to like other reviews by saying that they were helpful to you. That will help get more of the word out there. Additionally, Sharon has a book sort of plan. What would you call it, Sharon?
This is the
sort of a plan.
Bonus coaching program. Which is the official way we've termed that.
So essentially, when you buy in bulk, and that's 3 or more books, you can, reap the benefits of it. And there's a lot more information about that in the chat. We've provided it for you so that it's very easy. And we really encourage you to forward all this information on to all of the friends and loved ones that you know who not only could benefit from this, but there are plenty of people who probably would benefit and don't even know that they would really benefit from reading this. And that's part of what I love so much about it. So, Sharon, why this book? Why now? Why Burnout?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. I kind of just landed on this topic, and it's hard to even go back and figure out exactly what got me here. But I think it started out by thinking about who I really am interested to work with. And I was very much interested in working with people who are a little bit like me, who are high-achieving professionals and people who drive themselves pretty hard, and then thinking about like what happens when you do that, and started to look at physicians and lawyers and different professions, and like what are the things that they struggle with the most. And I saw that it was burnout, and I was like, we've all heard the term, but what is it really? And so I took some time to really look into the prospect and did some research on it, and looked at what books are out there. What does the research say about it? And the more I educated myself on it, the more interesting it became because, as a therapist and being with clients every single week, I would start to hear them talk about different things that they were going through. And then I would be like, oh, it sounds like you're burned out. And it kind of never really occurs to people sometimes that this is the terminology that really describes what they're going through. And so when they hear that, all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, I guess that really is what it is, right? And so it was giving them the language to understand. And then once you can, as you know, just like with anything else, once you're able to diagnose the problem, you're able to then figure out what the solution is. And so I really started to think about, yes, there are people who have written on the subject, and they've talked about what the symptoms are and things like that. I found that a lot of the emphasis has been on, and rightfully so on some part, to focus in on changing the setting. If you work in healthcare is problematic. That's what's causing all this burnout. But I also really believe that the person is bringing something of themselves into the situation, and that as a result, we can really empower people to know that if it's something that's coming from within, that if they have the right tools, they can really turn that around. And so then I thought about like all the things that I've been teaching over the years to my clients that I thought would be really helpful, and how to synthesize all the information in a way that is meaningful. How can I take the reader on a journey that is really like a step-by-step process of how to recover? And it's really so much more. It's really how to thrive in your life. So I think even if you're not burned out, but if you're struggling with stress, if you have, you know, any sort of issues, whether it's in your workplace or in your life in general, these are all the tools that I'm constantly teaching my clients almost across the board, you know, because they're just life skills for the most part. So I kind of took all this information and tried to bring it together into a systemic sort of a formula, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I have to tell you, it is very easy to read. And a lot of times the books written by clinicians for lay people are hard to follow, and that way get put down very quickly. But I want to ask you a question, because you bring up a lot of really important points. And one of the things I have found, and, you know, Brené Brown, who wrote Daring Greatly and has written a ton about vulnerability, and you know who she is. And,
of course.
And she has said that we view, working ourselves to the bone, essentially, being overworked, working ourselves to the extreme, as almost like a status symbol.
Yeah, I actually write about that in the book. And I've actually quoted her a few times in the book because she's like my idol. Like, I absolutely love her and I think she's brilliant. And I do agree there is that cultural component sometimes. So that's not the only thing, but it's definitely a contributing factor. I think there are other things that drive people that hard, and sometimes it's like having to prove something to the world, and sometimes it's having to prove something to yourself. So it could be a number of different things, but I definitely think that it's become this cultural thing of what will people think if I don't work as hard? Or, you know, there's always these questions that bring up anxiety of like how things are going to turn out badly, or some version of that. And I think there's a lot of myths that need to be dispelled when it comes to work and how to create more balance in our life.
So why would somebody pick up this book and say, okay, this is the book that's going to teach me to stop doing this? How do people who have been stuck in this rut pick up your book and go through it and guarantee themselves that they're going to be able to develop those changes in their lives?
Well, I'll tell you what, at least from my perspective, I try to create it in such a way where people can coach themselves through this as much as possible. So I don't want to just throw a bunch of information out at somebody, because then they'll just become overwhelmed. And so I try to break it down as much as possible, and then constantly have little sections and then little reviews of what did you just learn in this section, so that you can really chunk the information. And then also some questions for reflection. So how does that pertain to you? And I'm constantly bringing the reader back to thinking about their own situation and how can they apply the thing from this particular section to their situation before they move on to the next piece. Because it's so much information, right? I tell them this isn't a race to the end. This is a journey. And this is about you kind of learning about yourself and testing these theories out, trying on these different tools and seeing what works. So I've taken all the exercises that are in the book, and I've compiled them into a digital workbook. So readers who really want to separate the book, maybe they don't want to write in the book, or they want to have more room to go through everything that they're thinking about, to be able to either fill it out digitally and print it out for themselves, or just print out blank copies and be able to really have some sort of workbook that they're going through alongside. So this is really like a self-coaching process, right? And I try to make it as much of that sort of piece so that they can really do this work themselves. That said, I also know that when people are burned out, that sometimes they need more structure, and they need more hand-holding, and they need accountability, and all of those kinds of things. And so I've also created other structures. Like I have a program for people who want to coach with me and want me to take them through the steps in a shorter time frame where all those structures are there, I also created that as well. But really, for the masses, it's about finding the tools that I think will be helpful to them, helping them take this information and make sense of it through examples and stories and case studies, just to be able to think about how it can apply to them.
Mm-hmm. And just so that everybody knows, and I think that you will put it in the chat if you haven't, that it would be really great to go to the www.7esolution.com website. There are two really crucial, I think, videos that you created there that really kind of encapsulate what it is that you're trying to convey, and just very, very well done. So question for you. If someone's offering this book to a friend or a family member that they think would benefit from reading it, what is it that you would want them, what is sort of the real message that you want them to come away with from working through your book? And I will tell you that from doing it, I really appreciate how much you reinforce not only reading the material, but the processing of it by practicing it, by putting it into practice. I think that was a really, really instrumental piece of your book.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's essentially the point, right? I don't want people to just feel like it's more information, because, you know, you could go to Google and probably look all this stuff up, right? Well, at least not the case studies maybe, but there's not a lot new under the sun. It's really just how to bring it all together in a way that makes sense, that, like I said, takes you on this journey. And so the message to the audience, I think the biggest thing is, number one, so often the problem with burnout is that people don't recognize it until it's too late. Like I mentioned in the beginning, sometimes people are experiencing like a lot of stress. And so they don't understand that it's not just stress, but it's, you know, it's something that's, and I talk about the stress burnout continuum. So you're on this continuum, and sometimes we don't recognize burnout until it's too late. You're at the end of your rope, and then you're like, oh yes, I'm officially burned out. But it's actually something that happens over time. And so if we're managing the stress instead of letting it be this chronic thing that builds up, that's the first piece I want them to take away. If I had to really bring it all together into like one main thing, I would say the point here is to really empower people, because so much of the time we're externalizing all the reasons why we feel the way we do. I feel stressed because of my job. I feel stressed because, you know, there's too many demands on my time. You know, we're always thinking about what's going on outside that's creating all the chaos inside. And I think the main message here is you have more power than you realize. And when you start to take all of the different tools and concepts and mindsets, start to apply that, you start to feel different. And then you're like, wow, you know, I could really make a difference in my experience. So as a side note, as I was going through this process of writing this book, I also interviewed a lot of physicians and lawyers. And one story really sticks out that I'd love to share with you guys. And that is, I interviewed this one lawyer at the beginning of this process. By the way, you guys, this has been a 2.5 year process. So 2 years ago, when I was interviewing him, he was a very miserable lawyer. He was really unhappy at work. He was doing all these things to try and help himself feel better. So he did a course in meditation, and he was doing martial arts and exercising 5 days a week and trying to work from home 2 mornings a week. And this is pre-COVID, when like nobody was doing that, right? So he was trying all these different things, and like nothing was working. So throughout the writing of this book, I kept thinking about him, and I kept wondering, like, how is he doing? And so as I got closer to publishing, I reached back out to him and I said, you know, the book is pretty much done. I'd love to send you a copy because you shared your story with me as a thank you, but I'm also really curious how you're doing. So he had been over the course of a year, taking a program that's a little bit similar to the stuff that I teach around mindset and changing your thinking and changing some of your habits, and started to implement some of those things. And what he told me, which was really amazing and actually reinforced a lot of what I'm trying to do here, is he was absolutely joyous. Like, he was so happy in life. And I asked him, what happened? You know, what was this big difference? You know, and also, like, what's going on with your work right now? And he said, I tend to be this very negative thinker. Like, I you know, and we know this about lawyers. They have this lawyer brain where they tend to that's what their job requires of them, is to be able to think about worst case scenarios. And so they often get stuck in the negativity, and then they suffer for it. And so he was one of those people. And he really worked on himself to try and think about things in a more optimistic way. And it completely changed his life. And so when I asked him, well, what's actually different with your work right now? He said, absolutely nothing, right? The job was exactly the same 2 years later. It's just that he had changed. And as a result, his experience was so different. And so that was really reiterating the message of my book. And I was like, yes, this stuff really works, you know? And so I'm really hopeful that this changes people's lives. That's really the point.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think will be the hardest thing for readers to start? I mean, what do you think the hardest thing will be for readers to do in terms of starting to implement these 7 steps?
Well, I think that it's easy for people to, you know, look at, okay, this is like a 400-page monster, or that there's 7 steps, and like, where do I start? And it's about, take it slow. Start at the beginning, take your time, and go as slow as you need, you know, and all the exercises and all the tools are there for you. So if you allow yourself to do that, if you just take a breath, right, and just allow yourself to go through this process slowly, I think you'll prevent feeling overwhelmed by all of it. And that's essentially what I'm hoping will happen. I don't want people to get overwhelmed. And you know, I've kind of structured it in those small chunks, like I mentioned, for that purpose particularly. So I'm hopeful that people are able to get through it, and then they start to implement just a little bit, and then they see how that makes a difference, and then they can gain some confidence in the process, and maybe then they go to the next little step and do another little thing. So you don't have to swallow it whole, right? You can even just like pick it apart and take what works for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you, you know, I say this to you, I ask you this question for the person who has not yet picked up your book, but I will tell you, I mean, as soon as you pick up your book, you start reading it, and particularly, again, given in the time of COVID and hearing myself with, you know, my clients of how much burnout people are experiencing, I think that it really is it just captures you right away. So that's to your credit that you're able to do that, because that's not an easy thing to be able to do. So we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear some part of your book that maybe you want to share with the group. Is there a particular passage or a part of the book that you would want to share with everyone? Yeah, you know, I have to say that it hasn't been, that's probably the most difficult part for me, was picking something, because it's really hard to know like how to pick one little thing to read. But I landed on something, and I do want to share that, and I'm hoping that that's helpful. So the first E solution of my book is emotional intelligence. And so I picked this little section, which is about self-control. Which I think is an important topic that a lot of people struggle with, especially now during COVID. And so I decided I'm going to read that to you guys. So here goes. Having control over your emotions, and thus your behavioral response, requires you to build up the skills of tolerance and discipline. Once you become aware of your emotional state, you need to be able to ride the wave of your emotions, knowing that feelings come and go, and mindfully noticing what's happening within you rather than becoming fearful or overwhelmed will help you stay calm. The alternative is suppressing the emotion, which is a form of avoidance. While avoidance as a coping strategy may distract you from an unpleasant experience at the moment, it's not a long-term solution. Suppressed emotions tend to get stored in the body and can result in physical pain, autoimmune diseases, and eventually rupture in emotional outbursts. To gain mastery over any area of knowledge or skill, you need an investment of time and energy.
What can get in the way of mastery is either boredom or a preference to engage in pleasurable activities. Imagine that you want to write a book. This requires thought, research in some cases, and many hours of writing and editing. And while you have good intentions to sit down and write, you may become distracted by a television show or feel tempted to go out with friends for fear of missing out on the fun. All this temptation causes distraction and procrastination and prevents you from making strides toward your goal. Mastery requires discipline and a delay of instant gratification. What this has to do with emotional intelligence is that your behaviors are a result of your emotional state. If the reason you're procrastinating or giving up on your goal is that you're bored with the repetition of your work, you need to manage your boredom to stick with a task long enough to master it. Similarly, if you're blowing off your commitments to engage in fun, you need to manage your mindset, remember the benefits you will reap in the long run, and set up rewards for milestones along the way. This keeps you moving ahead and will lead to a sense of purpose in your life, which will outlive any short-term gratification you could attain in this moment. It's not only when you're bored that you seek stimulation and forgo possible long-term goals. If you experience low frustration tolerance, this may drive you to impulsivity in many situations. A standard illustration of this is on the road, when a person becomes impatient with other drivers, red lights, or pedestrians, they cause traffic to slow down. When they act out impulsively, they increase their own risk of being in an accident and hurting themselves and others. Being aware of how impatient you feel and then taking some deep breaths can help you get your rational brain back online, just when your emotional brain is taking over. Infusing your frustrating moments with relaxation can improve your mindset and sometimes mean the difference between life and death. Set your intention on building up your tolerance of negative feelings and on having the discipline to delay gratification so you can reach your ultimate goals. There is a time and place for everything. Although you don't have direct access to your emotions, you can manipulate your feelings through your thoughts and behaviors. I have included several cognitive and behavioral strategies here to help you attain a greater sense of control over your emotions. And then it goes into all the strategies. So that was just a little excerpt.
Well, and I think that it's important to note that with each of these strategies, you really do give not only anecdotes, but examples of, I think, how to really sort of see this as it applies to your own life, not just you, Sharon, but I mean anybody reading it. And it's done in such a meaningful and I think personal way that it really is impactful.